Well, I really appreciate each of you being here this morning, and I appreciate all of those who are watching us live and watching us later in the day via the internet and how we present through Burke what we do here at Northside. And I appreciate Greg mentioning Shawnee and what they have gone through over there. I know that on the campus of Oklahoma Baptist University, every single building was damaged. In fact, we have a group of people from Oklahoma Christian going over there in the morning to try to help them clean up and do various things. So all those things are important to keep in mind. Perhaps you recall that last week we entered into John chapter 8, and we entered in only to the first few verses, a story that is contained in 11 verses of the beginning of John chapter 8. It's about this woman who was caught in the act of sin, and she was taken before Jesus there in the temple courts. And it was a trap being laid by the Jewish leaders for Jesus, but he, in a clever way, evaded the trap. And the story comes to an end with Jesus saying for her to go, no condemnation, and to quit her life of sin. Following that chapter 8 has 59 verses. That means that 48 verses follow that story. And those 48 verses contain a constant conversation between the Jewish leaders and Jesus. And one might even call it a long debate. If it was a debate, Jesus never becomes angry. Jesus just keeps talking to them about who he is. And they don't like it. We've said it before. They don't like to hear, I am the light of the world. And they don't like to hear, I am the bread of life. And they certainly don't like to hear, I have come from heaven. And I'm doing the will of my Father. And my Father testifies about my work. They don't like to hear anything like that. Toward the end of the chapter, they pull out their trump card, as we would call it. Now, they rely heavily on their knowledge of the law. They rely heavily on their traditions and their customs. And they say that's going to make us right with God. But the thing they rely on even more than all of that is they are the descendants of Abraham. And that's what they finally say to Jesus. But we are Abraham's children. We are the descendants of Abraham. And Jesus will say, I knew Abraham. And they can hardly believe their ears. Now, he did know Abraham because he was God. And when Abraham was called to go into a land that he would show him, it was Jesus involved in that calling. Jesus knew Abraham. But they say, how he's been dead for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and you're not even 50 years old. How could you know Abraham? And now Jesus says this. It's not going to go well. He says, before Abraham was, I am. Now that phrase, as we would say in our slang kind of language, sends them over the edge. Because this term, I am, was a name God gave to himself when he was speaking to Moses. Moses is saying, well, you want me to go back to Pharaoh? Who do I tell him is sending me? I am. I am complete. I am everything. And suddenly Jesus uses that phrase and puts himself before their eyes where he should be, equal to God. I am. Do you know what they do? They pick up stones. And they're going to stone him. But there's a crowd. And he slips through the crowd and slips away from them. Now, I have been looking at this material for 2 weeks, trying to figure out, what do you do with this material? The first thing I decided was, I think I see 3 characteristics of these Jewish leaders, of these Pharisees. The first of these characteristics is they believed that they were right on everything. They believed they were right in every single way possible. The second thing they believed was they were so right that they became proud of their rightness, and they became arrogant. And the third thing was they became very stubborn. And when someone is very stubborn, they will not listen. So you put that combination together. You believe you're absolutely 100% right on your position. And you believe it so strongly that you're proud of your rightness. And you're so very stubborn that you will not listen. Have you ever seen that before? Have you ever seen that combination? And I use an illustration, for example, that I've used many times. You may be wearing out with it. But do you see it in politics? And you've heard me say that it seems to me, at least, my opinion, that in politics today it's more divided than at any other time in my life. And these people believe that they're absolutely right, and they're proud of their rightness, and they're so stubborn that they will not listen. And now they take it to this level that the Jews take it to. If you don't agree with me, then you are suddenly my enemy. Everybody got that? If you don't agree, then you are my enemy. You see it today in anything that has to do with social issues. Whether it's social justice issues, whether it's in this world of sexual identity issues, and I don't need to use all the terminology, but there are people who are believing that they are so very right, and they are proud of their rightness, and they are so stubborn that they will not listen, and anyone who disagrees becomes the enemy. Now, I have never in my life watched an episode of an apparent morning show on television called The View. I've never watched it. All I have done is read articles that come from it. But it appears to be made up of people who believe they are right, who are arrogant in their positions, and they're so stubborn they will not listen. And I'll get in big trouble for this, by the way. And anybody who disagrees, they count as an enemy. Had an interesting experience last Monday. Last Monday, a man came to our campus who is a graduate of Oklahoma Christian. He's a man of color. He is a president of a university in Michigan. University, a state university of about 10,000 people. Faithful Christian. Met his wife at Memorial Road. Was a wonderful man. We had a small luncheon, probably 40 people or so there. And finally, someone brought up the question, and they asked, what about DEI? That stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is the buzzword across America. It's a buzzword in higher education across America. And it's usually grounds upon which you fight. In fact, if you've been watching the news in Oklahoma, it is everywhere in the news in Oklahoma. The person who asked this question, I don't know what the intent was, but I've never heard anyone address it so well. he said, why is it? Why is it that we have to jump over to those areas where we disagree and we will never agree? And we automatically go into a fight. He said, why don't we talk about that which we do agree upon? And why don't we spend months talking about what we do agree upon until we become friends? And then we can get over into these areas where we will never agree and we don't have to fight and become enemies. And I thought, wow, that's what I've been saying for so long. And here is a man who has all the credentials in the world to be able to say it, and no one's going to argue. And it was powerful. And you may have seen these characteristics in family. Someone who was believing they're always right, and they're proud of their rightness, and they're stubborn, and were they easy to live with? By the way, that formula of taking what you agree upon and becoming friendly around that, and those areas you disagree upon, then you can handle them. Isn't that the way every marriage in the world works? Isn't that the way simple things work in businesses? And then we come to church. We come to the great subject of church. And I've told you, I've been trying to read stories about church history, books about church history. I asked a person who's very knowledgeable the other day, I said, would you please write for me a handbook? These books are too long and too hard for me to read. But we've been plagued through couple thousand years with the same problem. And so it's dangerous to come to the point in your life when you believe you are absolutely right. And when you are arrogant in your rightness, and you're so stubborn you won't listen to anyone. Now, set that aside and hold it for a moment. Embedded in these passages are two very familiar comments by Jesus that I personally have always taken out of context. And maybe I've taken them out of context and used them okay. But I want you to see them this morning. I want as many as people can listen possibly to this, to see them in context this morning. Bert's going to put the first one on the screen. You'll see it. There were a handful of Jews that were beginning to believe a little bit. And he says this, if you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciple. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, am I right? Have you heard that all your life? The truth will set you free? But look to whom he's speaking. Look at the crowd wherein this statement is spoken. These people who believe that they're right and they're arrogant and they're stubborn. Set you free from what? Set you free from what? Well, I know he sets us free from sin. I know he sets us free from a lot of things that go on in our lives. But in this context, these Jews are living in a religious prison. These Jews are bound up in chains that they don't even realize. And their lives are tied up and messed up and they don't even know it. And Jesus says, if you will look to me and you will hold to my teachings, you're going to find a freedom that you have never known before. So I want to suggest something to you. A long, long time ago in my life, I'm going to tell you my experience. I decided that I had to be someone who really loved truth. I also decided that I had to seek truth. Because I would listen to people speak, and they would come across so strongly. And I would listen to these subjects, and I would think, I don't know if I think like that. I don't know if I see it like that. Or I would look at the scriptures that they were looking at and making these, and I would think, maybe my mind doesn't work right. And so I began at that point in my life, very young man, saying, please, help me see what you want me to see from these scriptures. Help me to know what you want me to know. And I told you just a few weeks ago, I've added that now. I pray also that prayer, but I also pray this. Show me what I am supposed to know and tell me what you want me to say. I have wrestled with 48 verses in this chapter for 2 weeks. Show me what I need to know and tell me what I need to say. Because unless we love truth and keep our minds open and humble ourselves and truly seek God through the scriptures, I don't think we'll ever be truly set free. He wants us to be free. He wants our lives to be abundant, even in the midst of what Gary prayed about drought, even in the midst of what Gary prayed about sickness, even in the midst of problems with children, even in the midst of, and you can keep on. He wants us to be set free to live abundant lives and have eternal lives. But there's another passage. So Bart puts this one on the screen. Finally, Jesus looks at these people to whom he's been speaking. Now, everybody know who he's been speaking to. The Jewish leaders who believe they're absolutely right, and they're arrogant, and they're stubborn. He said, you're unable to hear what I say. Now, doesn't that just underline everything we've been talking about? You're unable to hear. You stopped up your ears. Or as Jesus might say in another place, you are dull of hearing. Your stubbornness has shut you down. Your arrogance has shut you down. And you know what? As a result of that, you belong to your father, the devil. See, earlier they called him the devil. In this same passage, they called him a demon. You belong to your father, the devil. And you want to carry out your father's desires. You know what he was? He was a murderer from the beginning. There was no truth in him. He's a liar. He's a father of lies. Now, put that in the context. These people who thought that they were right, and these people who were arrogant, and these people who were stubborn, who really deep down inside wanted to please God, have just become a tool for Satan. They've just become a tool for Satan. And do you realize how much destruction they were bringing to the lives of people? And instead of pulling people to Jesus, they would push people away from Jesus. And that happens still today. That happens still today. I talked with a man Friday. He preaches at a rather large church in Houston. Devin says his parents listen to him every Sunday. He grew up in Canadian Texas. A man named David Duncan. He said, Ken, I don't know what's happening. I keep hearing churches that are struggling and churches that are, after the pandemic, can't get back. He said, we're back. But he said, you know what's happening? We're having people from everywhere. He said, Houston is the most diverse city in Texas. It is sometimes said to be the most diverse city in America. He said, I can't tell you the number of Muslims who have come and we baptized them. I can't tell you the number of people from this area, that area, and they come and we're baptizing them. He said, we're learning so much. And he said, we just try to take the Bible and look at the Bible and just try to go through the Bible. And people being drawn to it. There's not an arrogant bone in his body. He does not believe he has all the answers. He says, I'm growing all the time. And there's no stubbornness in him. And people are being drawn to it. But if you do it the other way, you're driving people away to their own destruction. And Jesus says, you're really being a tool for Satan. You don't even realize it. Isn't that sad? Isn't it sad when people have so much potential and they want so much to please a God they believe created the world, and they do more harm than they do good? May it be we never are like that. May it be that we are seekers and lovers of truth. And may it be that we're humble and we listen and we look at Scripture and try our best to figure out, what does it really mean? How do I live my life correctly? How do I get into this kingdom? And how do I live inside of this kingdom? That's what the New Testament, I got to quit, I know. That's what the New Testament's all about. After it presents the coming of Jesus and the story of Jesus, it is a book inviting people into the kingdom and teaching them how to live in the kingdom. So that's the end of John chapter 8. In context with the lesson, we do agree on a lot of things. And one of the things upon which we agree absolutely 100% is that Jesus died. He died so that he could make everything he just said real. He meant what he just said so much. He died. And he wanted us to live in his kingdom, not bound in a religious prison. He wanted us to be set free so much that he died on that cross. And part of the plan was that he would be raised. And part of the plan was that in his resurrection, he would show all those who would unstop their ears and listen and open their eyes and see. I've done that so that you might have victory over death. I've done that so that life might be wonderful for you.